Alright, back for learning target 4.2. I can multiply and divide rational expressions. I apologize for construction noise in the background. We are working on finishing our basement in our house, so my mother-in-law can move in. So we have a babysitter. Anyways, multiply and divide rational expressions is very similar to what you did with simplifying rational expressions. There's just an added step with multiplying or dividing, which really doesn't change much. Let's go ahead and talk about the steps. First, we're going to factor the numerator and denominator of both fractions like we did when we were simplifying. And then we need to find restrictions on the domain. And then you're going to start canceling right away for multiplying. Dividing is a little different, so we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so as you can see here, the first one is already factored for us, so we don't really have to do any work there. So first step would be to factor everything you can factor in. I lost my pen here. There it is. Factor everything you can in this problem. Notice, though, that everything is pretty much factored. Can't do anything with it. When you're multiplying two fractions, technically all you're doing is multiplying straight across the top and straight across the bottom. So I can make that one big fraction. And once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and find my restrictions. So anything on the bottom will help me find my restrictions. Okay, so m plus 10 equals 0. If I solve that, I get negative 10. And minus 10 equals 0. If I solve that, I get positive 10. And then 3 can never equal 0, so I don't have to worry about that. So my restrictions are m cannot be negative 10 or 10. And then all I need to do is cancel. I made that one big fraction because I'm multiplying straight across the top, straight across the bottom. So anything in common between the top and the bottom can get crossed off. So I have 3's in the top and the bottom. And I have m minus 10's in the top and the bottom. So I'm left with m plus 6 over m plus 10. Final answer. Okay, let's do b. b is not factored for us, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Top of the first fraction, I can factor out a 9p, so I'm left with p plus 2. On the bottom of the first fraction, I can't do anything there, so I'm just left with the p plus 2. Second fraction on the top, I can take out a 7p, so I'm left with 5p minus 3. And on the bottom, I can take out a 10p squared, so I'm left with 5p minus 3. Okay, so all my factoring is done. Notice you just had to do GCFs there. We're kind of nice to you. We're going to find our restrictions, so anything that's in the bottom will impact our restrictions. So p plus 2 equals 0, 10p squared equals 0, and 5p minus 3 equals 0. First one, when I solve, I subtract 2 from both sides, so I get negative 2. Second one, I'm going to divide and then take the square root. So if I divide, I get 0. Okay. And then the last one, add 3 and then divide by 5, so I get 3/5. Okay, so these are my restrictions. P cannot be negative 2, 0, or 3/5. Okay, so just make sure you're really careful with your steps there. So you get P equals 3/5. Subtract 2, and then this one you'll take the square root afterwards, you still get 0. Now, once I'm done with that, first step factor, second step restrictions, third step, really all I'm doing is multiplying straight across, so I can multiply or cancel anything I have in common between the top and the bottom. So notice I have p plus 2's. Notice I have 5p minus 3 there. And then for the last part, I'm just going to simplify this and then show you kind of how this will go from here. So 9p times 7p actually gives me 63p squared. And on the bottom, I'm just left with 10p squared. Now look at this carefully. What else do we have in common that we can simplify? Well, I can cross off p squared and p squared, and I'm left with 63 over 10. Now, if you can reduce that fraction, please do so, otherwise you will not get full credit. In this case, we cannot. Okay, dividing rational expressions is very similar. The only difference is that before you start anything, you flip the second fraction over and change to multiplication. I'm going to write change to multiply. Okay, factor everything. Identify restrictions. Now the only difference here is because we flipped that fraction, we have a little bit more work to do to find our restrictions, and then cancel anything like we did in the last one. Okay, so first one is already factored for us, so we're going to go ahead and do this one. First step, only difference here is the first fraction stays the same, the second fraction gets flipped over, and then it changes to a multiplication problem. Okay, so first step is just flip that second fraction if it's a division sign, only for division sign. Now we're going to find our restrictions. So we're going to do 9 equals 0, x plus 3 equals 0, 1 equals 0. And then because we flipped this fraction over, since this was in the bottom to begin with, we also need to use that for a restriction in these problems. Okay, so anything that's ever on the bottom of the fraction has to be included in your restrictions. So 9 cannot be 0, we don't have to worry about that. This one, if I subtract 3, I get negative 3. This one can't be 0. If I add 10, I get 10. And then the last one, subtract 3 again, I get negative 3. I already have it listed there, so I'm not going to list it again. So my restrictions are negative 3 and 10. Okay? Now it's really important that when you simplify, you look at the blue one, not the original. Anything that you have in common between the top and the bottom can cancel. So my 9's cancel, my x plus 3's cancel, so I'm left with x minus 10 over 1, which is really just x minus 10. Okay? Next one, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing. First step, if it's division, flip that fraction over. Okay, second step is to factor everything that you can factor. So the first fraction is actually going to stay the same. And now the top of the second fraction, I'm going to factor out a negative 4k squared. I took a negative because the negative is out front. So I'm left with k minus 6. And then the bottom I can't factor, so I'm just going to put that in parentheses, and I'll put my k minus 6 in parentheses. Okay, we're going to find our restrictions. Apologize if you hear the baby crying, she's starting to wake up. K minus 6 equals 0, k minus 10 equals 0, negative 4k squared equals 0, and k minus 6 equals 0. Notice we already had that listed, so I'm not even going to do that again. So my restrictions are that k cannot be 6 or 10 or 0. Okay, I'm hoping that you catch on and you start doing that in your head instead of having to show all the work. If you do show the work, not a huge deal. Just trying to save you some time there. Okay, so first step, flip the fraction. Second step, factor everything. Third step, find your restrictions. Last step, you're going to cancel anything in common between the top and the bottom. So I'm left with negative 4k squared on top and k minus 10 on the bottom. Okay, final answer there. And then this last one here, same thing. We're going to go ahead and flip that second fraction. X squared plus 12x plus 36 stays the same. Change it to multiply and flip this over. Okay. Second step is to factor everything, and then we're going to find our restrictions. So on the top, I have x factor, so 36 and 12. I'm going to use 6 and 6. So I have x plus 6 times x plus 6 over 2. Second fraction on the bottom, I'm going to divide by 8 times x plus 6. If we find our restrictions, we're going to do 2 equals 0, and 8 equals 0, and x plus 6 equals 0, and then 8 equals 0, which we don't really need because we already had. So 2 can't be 0, 8 can't be 0. Don't need to worry about that last one. So my restriction, my only restriction is negative 6. Okay. Last step, anything in common between the top and the bottom get canceled, so I have 8's there, and I have 1x plus 6 in the bottom, so I can only cancel 1x plus 6 on the top. I need to leave the other one there. So my final answer, that was really sloppy, I apologize, x plus 6 over 2, and you are good. Okay, so factor everything, find your restrictions, cancel anything in common between the top and the bottom. The only difference is if it's division, make sure you flip that second fraction first and pay attention to your restrictions. Go ahead and try the practice problem or the guided practice problem and hit pause while you're doing it and come back and check it when you're done. Go ahead and check this. I didn't show the step where I flipped it. I factored it when I flipped it at the same time to save myself a little bit of room. Restrictions, I didn't have to do x plus 8 twice, but I do have 4 restrictions there. Negative 8, 3, positive 7, negative 7, and then I canceled. So hopefully this isn't too bad. Go ahead and practice. You'll get more practice again tomorrow, and have a great day.